In recent years, a fungus called Candida auris has started to spread across the world. It's nothing special to look at, just another member of the sprawling Candida family of yeasts. Most of these yeasts live harmlessly on the skin or moist surfaces of the human body. But some, if they enter the body, can lead to infections. The most widespread of these infecting yeasts is Candida albicans. This fungus causes the infection of the mouth known as thrush. Its effects are also sometimes referred to simply as a yeast infection. And whichever part of the body C. albicans infects, it can cause itching and soreness, sometimes even fevers. However, whereas C. albicans is generally just a nuisance, treated with pills and creams that one can buy over the counter, C. auris poses a new menace. Unheard of until the recent past, now it's spreading across the world. And doctors are at a loss about how to deal with it. C. auris poses a particular problem for scientists. It's hard to tell that it's around unless advanced techniques are used. Moreover, if it is mistaken for another type of fungus, then there's a good chance that it won't be dealt with properly managed. And it's important to get it right because it will be transmitted throughout a hospital without the right steps being taken to prevent it. The yeast is so named because it was first discovered in material that came from a Japanese patient's ear, although that isn't the only area that it can infect. In Latin, auris means ear. The word Candida also comes from the Latin, meaning bright white, but C. auris appears gray when cultured. One of the chief causes for concern with C. auris is that it can often withstand antibiotics. Indeed, the drugs that doctors typically employ to clear up Candida infections often cannot fix it. And this is a growing problem for health professionals. More than 20,000 people die each year in the United States due to such so-called superbugs. Such resistance hasn't been seen in other versions of Candida on the whole. Nonetheless, it's significant in C. auris. 9 out of 10 infections with the yeast have proven resistant to one of the drugs used to treat it, in fact. And 3 out of 10 have resisted 2 drugs or more. The issue of resistance to antibiotics has become important, with the UK's Healthcare Infection Society reporting that 700,000 people die annually from infections that cannot be treated with the drugs we rely on. And that number might rise to 10 million each year by 2050, the Society says, as Centers for Disease Control and AMP Prevention, CDC, Medical Officer Alexander Collin explained to Stat News in January 2017, some bugs are now evolving more quickly than scientists are able to keep up with. We have relied for so long on just newer and newer antibiotics, he said. But obviously the bugs can often develop resistance faster than we can make new ones. Indeed, Imperial College London fungi expert Matthew Fisher told the New York Times in April 2019 that drug resistance is now a huge issue. He said, "It's an enormous problem," he admitted. "We depend on being able to treat those patients with antifungals. But it may be this very dependency that's caused the surge in resistant organisms. While antifungals are crucial in fighting human infection, they're much utilized in preventing rot in plants as well. And scientists now say there's evidence that using antifungals to keep crops free of disease has contributed to the increase in the numbers of fungi that resist medicines in human beings. Furthermore, poor dosing levels or not applying medication for long enough might also boost resistance. On top of that, there's a degree of evidence that antibacterial drugs working in the gut might create conditions that are good for Candida. Although it's not possible to say for sure that lowering antibiotic intake will lessen fungal infections, the CDC is certain that proper use of medications is crucial in tackling the issue of resistance. Given that Candida strains can live quite happily in the gut or on the skin, it's no surprise that C. auris readily spreads. Equipment and surfaces can become contaminated, and once a person has an infection, the yeast can move from them to other people. However, precisely how it spreads isn't yet entirely clear. However, while we might not know all the details of the how, we nonetheless know that it does spread. Indeed, it can travel throughout a hospital on equipment or hands, and once it's in one healthcare establishment, it can easily be transmitted to another. It can also be transported in meat or on vegetables that have been fertilized with infected manure. The yeast even crosses borders, in fact, hitching a ride on travelers and goods. and the spread of the condition can be astonishing. After a patient who tested positive for C. auris passed away following 3 months of treatment in the Mount Sinai Hospital, New York City, the fungus proved very hard to get rid of. Even specialized equipment couldn't finish the job, in fact, and some parts of the room had to be torn out to get the job done. Hospital Chief Scott Lauren told the New York Times just how extensively the yeast had infested the room. He said, "Everything was positive: the wall, the bed, the doors, the curtains, the phones, the sink, the whiteboard, the pump." And that wasn't all, he explained, listing even more places that had subsequently tested positive for C. auris. As we noted earlier, C. auris was first found in the ear of a Japanese patient. However, although the scientists who discovered it thought that they'd found a SINLGE new species, it might be that there are 4 separate strains of the yeast, and they're all somewhat resistant to drugs. When scientists investigated the fungus genome, they found that it comes in 4 types. And those 4 versions are so different that they may have separated into strains in the distant past, each one becoming resistant to drugs. One of the researchers, Snigdha Vallabhanani, told the New York Times, "Somehow, it made a jump almost seemingly simultaneously and seemed to spread. And it is drug-resistant, which is really mind-boggling." Vallabhanani's boss, Tom Chiller, has a theory that C. auris might well have been around for many centuries. For most of its history, though, it hasn't been all that aggressive. However, as powerful chemicals destroyed more common fungi, opportunity knocked for C. auris. And while antifungals slaughtered its competitors and created room for it, it thrived. Whatever its exact origins, since 2009 C. auris has begun to pop up all over the globe. By 2011 it had been spotted in South Korea. Now, more than 30 countries have suffered infections. It's also thought that the yeast might also be present in other nations that haven't yet identified the yeast. However, it does at least seem that awareness of the problem is spreading. As we've heard, there are different strains of the fungus, and these are seen in different parts of the planet. And further comparisons between these known types have suggested that the one found in the UK might be yet another separate strain of C. auris. And when C. auris first showed up in the UK in 2015, it caused panic. For example, London's Royal Brompton Hospital phoned university expert Johanna Rhodes for help. In an April 2019 interview with the New York Times, she recalled what the hospital had told her: "We have no idea where it's coming from. We've never heard of it. It's just spread like wildfire." Meanwhile, in Valencia, Spain, C. auris broke out in a hospital with 992 beds. Its effects were incredible, with more than 350 people contracting the condition while not becoming ill, and in excess of 80 coming down with infections. Worse was to follow, however, with more than 4 in 10 of those infected passing away within a month. Indeed, somewhere between 3 and 6 out of every 10 people involved in outbreaks of C. auris have perished. The story is somewhat complicated, though, because a large number were patients who were already sick. The CDC also says that it is not sure whether these infections are any more dangerous than those of other Candida species. C. auris has led to infections of the blood, as well as of wounds and ears. Once in the blood, it can of course spread throughout the organs of the body. Although it has been found in specimens taken from the urine and respiratory matter, it's still not certain that it actually infects the bladder or lung. Not everyone is at high risk of infection, however. Candida fungi can be found in people who are perfectly healthy, in fact, as a quite normal part of the gut or mouth. Above all, they're found on the skin. Usually, growth of the yeasts is kept down by the immune system and other microbes fighting for space. Consequently, C. auris infection most often occurs in people who are already sick, especially those who have lines that intrude into the body. Those with weak immune systems, often when that's been caused by conditions such as HIV or diabetes, are most at risk, along with people who've just undergone surgery, because it's most often encountered in a medical setting. Travel to places that have reported C. auris shouldn't be dangerous. If you're hospitalized, however, then you might become prey to the superfungus. What's more, a darker future could lie ahead if current trends continue, with the drug-resistant organism running rampant. Indeed, some experts think that even healthier people could come under threat from the superfungus and its ilk. Within little more than 3 decades, more people may be dying of infections by drug-resistant organisms than of cancer. Scientists warn of the need for new drugs and of the importance of ceasing to overuse the ones we already have. Meanwhile, the superfungus has reached the United States. A woman from the United Arab Emirates entered a New York hospital in May of 2013, as she was having difficulty breathing. Although she came up positive for C. auris, the hospital didn't think that it was especially important until a 2016 CDC alert confirmed the danger of the yeast. The yeast may have killed even before then, however, and the patient in question didn't have the South Asian strain that prevails in the U.S. That version of the fungus was responsible for the demise of an American who'd gone to India in 2017. She'd undergone surgery there and had become infected. The patient was returned to the U.S. by plane but subsequently passed away from her condition in Texas. She was just one of nearly 600 people who'd been infected by C. auris in the U.S. by April 2019. More than half of those infections had occurred in New York, while New Jersey and Illinois had also seen more than 100 cases each. And it's not just in hospitals. Some Chicago nursing facilities are finding that half their residents have contracted the superfungus as well. It's perhaps no wonder, then, that after warning medical professionals about the yeast, the CDC became swamped with emailed queries. It seems that even some of those who nurse the sick may be concerned about their own well-being. One doctor told the New York Times about the fear he'd felt when treating an infected patient. "I found myself not wanting to touch the guy," he admitted. "I didn't want to take it from the guy and bring it to someone else." Perhaps this concern is partly fueled by how hard it is to detect the superfungus. It can only be diagnosed by examining the cultures of various bodily fluids. Even that test isn't straightforward, though. It's hard to tell C. auris and C. humulini apart. And you can't deduce whether somebody has the infection just from inspecting their physical condition. Indeed, some people don't exhibit symptoms at all, so they have no idea that they're spreading the superfungus. The CDC says as many as 10% of people that underwent its superbug screen did in fact have a disease that was resistant to drugs and didn't even know it. Moreover, you also might not even know you've been infected if you're sick with something else. Symptoms such as chills and fever that persist are common, but they can of course have other causes, and only the lab can say for sure. But if you're diagnosed with superfungus infection, is there anything you can do about it? In some cases, the strain of C. auris in question will turn out to be susceptible to a type of drug named Candida. But some versions of the superfungus not only resist that medication but also the other 2 principal potential cures. When this happens, the best hope is that large doses of a mixture of medicines will clear it up. Given the difficulty of dealing with the superfungus, the CDC advises that even medical professionals should consult an expert when they come across it. Meanwhile, the CDC continues with its job to try to restrict the spread of the yeast. This isn't easy because no one wants to admit that they have had an outbreak. In some cases, states have even allegedly refused to share any information publicly beyond confirming that they've had cases. Nonetheless, the CDC issues detailed guidelines for both medical staff and laboratories. Its aim is to make sure that labs can spot C. auris and that people keep their hands clean with sanitizer and soap after coming into contact with the infected. But knowledge about the superfungus remains limited. Indeed, Tom Chiller, chief of the CDC's fungal team, which is trying to halt the superfungus in its tracks, outlined to the New York Times the scale of the problem. He said, "It bubbled up, and now it is everywhere." And Chiller didn't hold back when describing the organism, adding, "It is a creature from the Black Lagoon."